Knives have changed. It's no longer about unique design, practicality, or performance. It's an endless series of minor iterations brought on by OEMs and micro brands. Knives and their consumption of money have become a well-oiled machine. Knives have changed. Artificially controlled sprint runs contain artificially rare color schemes and steel combinations that the end user won't harness due to the artificial scarcity. Handle iteration, steel iteration, grind iteration, buzzwords and groupthink, everything is iterated and resold and kept under control. Custom and small batch makers are running online art galleries instead of businesses, and taking deposits and upfront payments for something that may forever remain an idea. Companies and makers with existing backlogs and customers are selling new vaporware to new customers and making a new backlog. Others are vanishing in a cloud of questions. An industry mindset drowning in vicarious associations to military and law enforcement. Under the false inference these models are officially issued, knives have changed. The age of innovation has become the age of iteration, and all in the name of perpetuating intangible reasons to buy the same knife over and over. Knives have changed.
That's right, y'all couldn't live with your own failure, so where does that bring you?
Back to me.
Uncle Randy! Well, hi there everybody. Now the usual fella who runs this here video production, he ain't been around so much lately. I'm not sure if what's all that aforementioned stuff about the knife industry, or maybe he just got a hold of some of that S45VN, and all the blood went from everywhere else in his body straight to his penis, and he passed out and hasn't been able to stand up for a while. Could be either one. At any rate, we're going to talk today about something that you can't measure in numbers, and that's tradition and culture. And what personifies those two virtues more than the Buck 110? Now the Buck 110, you may know, is something that I carry every single day. It's not a modern knife, but it's something that you can really set your watch to. So we're going to talk today about all the good things about the Buck 110, and I might even be a little bit cheeky and let y'all know about some of the weaknesses of the Buck 110. Because as much as this is one of the most perfect productions that mankind has produced, there are still some things that I reckon you could just about do a little bit better. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the Buck 110. I'll compare it to some things so you get a bit of a size comparison of it, because I find that's the best way to illuminate y'all on how big or small something is. And from there we'll just break down the individual components of the said knife, and we'll talk about it. We'll get right to that nitty gritty. So y'all stay tuned, and you're going to get the grand Uncle Randy tour of the Buck 110 traditional lock-back folding hunter pocket knife. Alrighty, so this here is the knife in comparison to my hat that I wear every day. It's a size 62 hat, so it's got a reasonable diameter, and I assume that's going to give you a bit of a rough idea of how large these two things are in three-dimensional space. But in case that one isn't enough, let's look at something else you probably all know the rough dimensions of. Now this here is a A4 portrait of President Ronald Reagan. I took the liberty of taking a photo stat of the one we've got hanging on our wall. The wife would be awful dark at me if I was to let something happen to the nice glossy one we've got above the little shrine we've built there to him. And that's the open knife up against the picture of the fine ex-President Reagan. And I'll close the knife up just so you get a bit of a handle on how it looks when it's closed. So you see, perhaps if you're intimately familiar with President Reagan as we are, you'd know how large his face is when printed on A4. And you see there that the Buck 110 is about one Reagan face length. It's something that's relatively pocketable, but still has that kind of regal presence that you're expecting to have of a knife of this station. Now this here is the knife in my pocket. Now this ain't a really thin knife. It's certainly got some presence to it, but I think that's part of the fun of the Buck 110. Like my Uncle Todd used to play a game where he'd say, "Hey boy, grab at the 110," and so all the little kids would run up and they'd be grabbing at his pocket here, and the first one to get a good old handle of Buck 110, well, they'd get a treat from his other pocket. So you had all the kids around kind of grabbing old Uncle Todd's Buck 110, and you could always feel it. It was just sitting in the very same position, and you could grab onto it, so hefty butt there, real great ease. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that whilst it's heavy and it swings low in your pocket, you can reach in there and you ain't gonna mistake it for nothing else, or at least I don't think I've ever mistaken it for something else. Although, nope. Let's turn off those thoughts and let's get back to the review of the Buck 110. So it's a bit of a pocket heavy knife, but it's well, goodness me, I think my Uncle Todd might have been a bit of a sex predator. Anyway, the Buck 110 here, it's what you call a clip point blade, and that means the blade's got a slight curvature from where they cut it off from the spine down to the point. This makes for a very sharp point, and it makes for a real fine piercing and poking knife. So you can really get this little tip here in between whatever you're trying to get it in between. It's not the best for heavy work. It's got an air of delicacy to it, but it's very acute in terms of the way you'd want to sort of really thread it in there between, say, well, I'm trying not to use any examples of the things Uncle Todd used to do, because they just send me to a sad place at the moment. But I guess you could say if you needed to get under a staple or something, you'd at least want to get the tip maybe a few millimeters under said staple until you gave it a twist, because whilst it'll get under there really easy, it doesn't really have a great amount of material built up there behind it. So you'll get in there easy, but you just got to make sure you put a bit of extra steel behind it. So there's that. Now the steel here, talking about that, it's the 420HC from Buck. Now the fellow who runs this channel, he's done some relatively extensive testing on the 420HC from Buck. 115 on the factory edge of the Buck 110. Paul Boss, he's a very good man, decent man, and he's a heat treater that's been building up some level of expertise in the heat treatment of 420HC. And you really do get a tangible difference in the edge retention and the general performance of the Buck 420HC compared to what you could say are some inferior 420HCs from Gerber or from, well, hell, everyone else who makes low quality or low budget knives at the very least. So Buck's 420HC, whilst it ain't no Maximont or S50VN or whatever they are all going on about, then you definitely find a level of sort of reliable performance. And the best thing about it is you don't even have to worry yourself with having a sharpening system. You can just sharpen this on the bottom of a coffee mug, and that's a true fact you can take to the bank. Now the handle materials here, you got what's called a diamond wood, or there's a few other variants, but this one's called diamond wood. Now I ain't familiar with what the diamond tree is. I assume it might be some composite wood and other material. I'm not super familiar. You got some brass on the end, and the brass really does build a bit of that character as you use it. See, I've left this knife in a bit of a puddle on a wet table as a drink that spilled, and I had not realized, and so it sort of sat there overnight, and I found that the diamond wood must have some element of sealant going on here, because it hadn't swelled or done anything too strange, but I noticed the bolster coloration did alter. However, I'm of the mindset that adds some character, and it makes it your knife. So I wouldn't be too bothered about worrying about the erosion that time tends to take to these sorts of items. So you got kind of a robust, stately looking handle with some dimension on it that is I guess it does sit pretty proud in you or your Uncle Todd's pocket. But it still has it's a little bit of extra weight to it that I quite personally associate with quality. You know, some people associate excellence in machining or action with quality. I associate weight with quality, as a lot of folks in my age group tend to do. I used to have a remote control from a German television company, and they put some element in there that made it nice and heavy, that remote control. You just felt, you know what, this is quality. Until the TV stopped making sound come out of the speakers, and then I had to go and get a new one. But geez, I'd take that remote control back in an instant. So there we are. There, it's a heavy knife, but it's something that I believe is in line with the character of the piece. Now, talking about what my favorite, and I would even liken to be the favorite of the other fellow who runs this channel, and that's the grind. Now, this grind here is a hollow grind. And whilst it's the name you gotta get your head around, it's not going all the way through. So it isn't a holler this way, and it isn't holler as in calling out to your sister to tell her to come in and cook you and your dad an apple pie. It's not that kind of holler, and it's holler as in there's a certain concavature to this grind here, rather than just going flat straight down there. There's a concave that really allows the material to slip past that thin edge. So you got this excellent concave or hollow grind, and that really does work well with the relatively thin edge and the fine, but not super fine steel that is the 420H, say, with the Paul Boss heat treatment. So that's my favorite aspect of the knife. This really is a slicey devil. And whilst I shouldn't invoke the devil's name like that, it's worthwhile, I think, taking the risk. Now, one thing I've always found with the Buck 110 is that the handle is actually one of the few examples of a folding knife handle that you can hold on to all day. That is again due to the substantial bulk and girth of the thing, and just the materials at play. They're nice and smooth, and there's a certain degree of chamfering along this inside. Because often when this knife closes in, when they have to do that, they hide the blade away into the handle. It's a relatively new technology, I'm told. It usually has a bit of a rough channel, whereas this brass material here, it's chamfered, or it's built up a bit of a chamfer at the very least. So even when you get your big old mitt and you wrap it all the way around there and you really sink in, you don't have a great degree of discomfort. So I'm relatively happy with how it is to use for small tasks and for short bursts of time, as well as for perhaps a longer task like skinning out an elk and then holding it while you type on your computer one hand, telling everyone about how you skin out an elk with your Buck 110. So it's a knife that's really there for all seasons. You could have it for the little. I got to cut a thread off my new R.M. Williams shirt. Or you've got I've got to do a large butchery process, and I'm hoping my knife isn't too uncomfortable, and you'll be plumb tickled that it ain't. It's quite comfortable indeed. So very comfortable handle. It's got a decent steel. It's got a fantastic grind, a nice acute little point there. It's a little on the heavy side, and it does come with an optional belt pouch if you like that. And I fancy a belt pouch, but then I prefer to carry my mobile phone on a pouch in my belt because that's a slightly cooler. My wife really likes when I do that. It really gets her tickled. I was out there the other day, and she saw me out in the yard from her sewing room, and she saw me. She gave me a phone call from inside on the house phone, and I reckon it was the act of me reaching in and getting my flip phone off my belt, and its leather belt holster, and answering it, and she said, "Randy, you better come in here right now, because you know who else is Randy? Me." So I went in there and I gave her what for. I did. Oh goodness me, I've overshared. Anyway, that's the effect that the Buck 110 has on me. It gets me all excited and gives me the vapors. So I hope it does have the same effect on you. And it's a relatively attainable knife, even still. It costs you about $120 in Australia right here, but in America you can still get it for about $50, and you can get all sorts of other variations too. You can get yourself an automatic version if you got the weak hands of a sissy and you can't be you can't be bothered going like that. But that's up to you. I won't comment except for on your YouTube video about it. I'll leave you a big old comment on that. And then you get some ones with the fancier newfangled steels like your S30Vs and your CPM 20 CVs if you shop at selected retailers and all that. So there's some options with this classic knife here. But if you're anything like me, you just prefer something a little bit less impact and a little bit more tradition and a little bit more cultural. So. And when it comes to a knife in the heart of the American culture, I think the Buck 110 is hard to beat when it comes to something that has a great story, but also has a great amount of quality. Thank you all for watching my Buck 110 review. I hope it's been illuminating. I've learned some things about myself. Alrighty. And again, thank you all for hold up there, I got a sneeze coming on. I won't tell my heart, my achy breaky heart, I just don't think you'd understand. If you could tell my heart, my achy breaky heart, I might fuck up and kills man.